guys, what's up? It's Savannah. Welcome back to my channel, and today we are back with another missing persons case. I know it has been a while since I've done one of these videos, and I'm sorry for that, but I have a really important case to share with you guys today. And this case is very frustrating because it doesn't have the ending that we would all hope for, and it doesn't have any answers even after 20 years. But because of that, I think it's extremely important to spread the awareness about this case and not just let it fall silent. I personally had never heard of this case until I started researching it, and if I'm being completely honest, I'm extremely surprised by that. I think this is very much a lesser known case, and I think it's extremely important, even though it is 20 years later, to still spread the awareness about it. So for today's video, we are going to be talking about the case of Wendy Hudakoc. Wendy was 14 years old when she was last seen on November 14th of 1998. She lived with her mother, Shelly, and her stepfather, Dan Campbell. So Shelly and her two daughters, Charlene, who was 16 at the time, and Wendy, who was 14 at the time, had moved to Naples to live and start a new life with Dan Campbell, who Shelly had married and who was the kid's stepfather. Dan and Shelly did run a pretty strict household. The girls had curfews and they weren't allowed to talk on the phone past a certain hour, but all in all, they were just protecting their kids, and they were just protective parents and trying to keep their kids safe. Wendy's described as the outgoing teenager. She was funny and just bright and happy-go-lucky, but she also did have a little bit of a rebellious side to her. She was a rule breaker. She did kind of like to push the envelope a little bit, but she was just like a typical teenager, you know? Everyone, I feel like, goes through those stages in their teenage years, just trying to see what boundaries they can push. And so Wendy was very much that type of girl. Her sister describes her as curious and definitely a boundary tester, and her stepfather said that she wasn't necessarily boy crazy, but as any typical 14-year-old, she had her crushes and she had the people that she was interested in, but she never had like a boyfriend or anything like that at the age of 14. So the two daughters, Wendy and Charlene, were living with Shelly and Dan in Naples, Florida at the time. And on the night of November 14th of 1998, Dan and Shelly had to go to Tampa for an overnight business conference, and Dan had asked his coworker and her boyfriend to stay at their house and watch over the girls. He didn't like the idea of Charlene and Wendy staying together. They were only 16 and 14, and he just wanted them to be looked after. So on the night Wendy went missing, Charlene, her sister, had a friend over named Shauna, and Charlene remembers that Wendy had received a phone call a little bit past 9 p.m., which was already breaking the rules a little bit considering they weren't allowed on the phone past 9 p.m., but whoever she was on the phone with at the time had told her that they were going to come and pick her up and they were going to go to this party together. Wendy got off the phone and tried to get Charlene and Shauna to go to the party with her because she didn't want to go alone. Charlene and Shauna weren't really about it. They thought that because it was all 14-year-olds and they were 16, that they didn't want to go, and also they knew it was breaking the rules, so they didn't want to do that either. So they decided to stay back. And once everyone in the house went to bed, Wendy snuck out of the house through her bedroom window, and that is the last time she would ever return home. So the next morning, Charlene had gone into Wendy's room expecting her to be there sleeping, maybe a little bit tired from the night before, so she was sleeping in a little bit. And when she went into Wendy's room, she found that Wendy was not there. The window was left wide open, the bed was unmade, and Wendy was gone. Charlene automatically became panicked and she decided to page Wendy. Wendy had taken her stepfather Dan's pager the night before and told Charlene, you know, if you need me, if you need anything, to page me and I will respond within 10 minutes or I'll be home or whatever. So she starts paging Wendy and saying, come home, get home, and Charlene is getting no response from Wendy at all. After about 2 hours of Charlene blowing up this pager, she decides that the best thing to do at this point would be to call her parents and let them know that something was very wrong. Wendy's stepfather Dan describes this memory as him and his wife being at the hotel. They were at the front desk. I'm unsure if they were checking out of the hotel or if they were in the lobby or whatnot, but the woman who was the receptionist at the front desk told Dan that his daughter Charlene was on the phone wanting to talk to him, and Charlene had told Dan and Shelly that Wendy did not come home from a party the night prior, and Dan and Shelly immediately got in the car and drove home from Tampa to Naples. So when Wendy's parents got home, they immediately called 911 because everyone just kind of had a feeling that something was very wrong. Even though Wendy did like to push the boundaries, it was kind of uncommon for her to kind of push them this far. The police showed up and they automatically labeled Wendy as a runaway. This was extremely frustrating for Wendy's family. Wendy had run away before in the past, but she ran away to a friend's house in Naples. And according to Charlene, her sister, she said Wendy wouldn't have run away. She didn't take enough things to run away. She literally just left with that pager. There was no way that she would run away with nothing. Luckily though, Wendy was soon considered an endangered missing person when the police and her parents were told that Wendy was seen at this party with a 21-year-old man named Ron. They were only given a first name though, so it was really difficult to kind of figure out who they were talking about. Her parents had no idea who Ron was. No one really knew who he was. And so the police department went back in their database and searched all men named Ron around his age range, and they had printed out the pictures of these men and taken those pictures to the girl who had the party's house, and they laid them out for her. And that is when she identified the man that Wendy was with that night as 20-year-old Ron DePeppo. And to just confirm that it was the correct Ron, they traced back the phone call that Wendy had made that night, and it was linked to Ron DePeppo's phone. Now, like I said, Wendy's parents had never heard of a Ron DePeppo, but apparently Ron and Wendy had met at a bowling alley prior to her disappearance, a month prior. They had known each other a month, and this kind of sparked this memory that Dan had, because in between that month's time period, he received a phone call in the middle of a school day from a man asking if Wendy was home, and his response was, "She's at school and why aren't you?" And the man on the other line said, "Oh, I don't go to school anymore, like I'm too old for that." And he said he was 18, and Dan asked if he knew how old Wendy was, and the man said that he knew she was young, and Dan said that she was 14 and told the man on the other line to never call the house again. That man on the other line ended up being Ron DePeppo. Now, Ron at this time was 20 years old, and he did kind of have a little bit of a reputation with underage girls. He had some minor felonies, but nothing too major that would raise a lot of suspicion. It was a lot of little things here and there, but police still did bring him in for questioning. They asked Ron what had happened that night, and he said that he was driving Wendy home from the party. It was about 2:30 in the morning from the night she disappeared, and she had gotten a page from someone, and so they pulled over to this gas station and she used the payphone. And when she had got back in the car with Ron, she told him that she was going to meet up with her friend named Jeff and to just drop her off in her front yard. And according to Ron, he did that, and then he left and went and spent the night at his friend Johnny Walker's house. Ron also had a girlfriend at that time named Becky, and apparently Becky had told the police that Ron had asked her to say that he had spent the night with her, the night in question, the night that Wendy went missing. Personally, I find it a little bit odd to have two alibis. There is a lot of inconsistencies throughout the story, so I just want to warn you now, but that's the first one. Another issue with pulling over to the gas station, making a phone call story, is the police actually checked the records of the payphone at the gas station that Ron had said that the two of them had gone to, and there was no phone call made at that time. Her parents and her friends also validate the fact that she does not know anyone named Jeff. They had never heard of anyone named Jeff. Jeff was a brand new name for them, and the family and friends did not buy it at all. Now let me talk a little bit about Johnny Walker. So Johnny Walker at this time was 17 years old. I'm not exactly sure how Ron and Johnny knew each other, but they did, and Johnny also didn't have the best past history with young girls, but because Ron had said that he had gone and spent the night at Johnny Walker's house the night of the disappearance after he dropped Wendy off, Johnny was also brought in for questioning by the police. So Johnny's story and Ron's story do not add up at all. Johnny says that Ron left his house around 10:30, 11 o'clock p.m. on November 14th, the night of the party, saying that he was going to go out with a girl, and he didn't return until about 9 a.m. the following morning, and said that he had gone out with a girl named Wendy. The police said that Ron DePeppo was very inconsistent with his stories. He was very unorganized. He was very scatterbrained, kind of all over the place, contradicting himself sometimes, but throughout all of it, he was still considered the main person of interest in this case. So about 2 weeks after Wendy went missing, the police were interviewing Ron again, and he had said that his car had actually caught fire and burned basically completely in an accidental fire that was caused by Johnny. Him and Johnny were driving in the front seats, and Johnny had a cigarette. He said that Johnny flicked the cigarette out the window, and a part of the cigarette had gone back into the car and reached the back of the car onto a pair of blue jeans, which then caught fire and ended up having his whole car burned to flames. However, Johnny's story is that Ron was the one with the cigarette and Ron was the one who burned the car down. It's the little inconsistencies like this that have things not make sense at all and make people look very suspicious and shady. Regardless of whether they're actually guilty or not, the inconsistencies and the lies just don't make it look good. Johnny was given a polygraph and was asked questions regarding the car, and he actually passed. And I know polygraphs aren't always 100% accurate, but it is just something to keep in mind. Because the car was burned and everything in it was burned, it was very difficult for police to go through and pick out things and see if any of Wendy's belongings were in there or if there was any evidence, and there was absolutely nothing except there was a hammer in the back of the car, and the hammer had a fiber on it, and the police said it could have either been a piece of hair or something along those lines, but still, because the fire had burned everything, it was not enough for them to be able to link it to any DNA, so they were still left at 0. Wendy's stepfather Dan had reached a point where he had had enough. He was fed up, and he was fed up with not having answers, and he was fed up with not knowing where his stepdaughter was, and so he had actually brought a friend over to Ron DePeppo's house. According to Dan, him and his friend were in the driveway, and they knocked on the door, and Ron came out, and in the driveway was the burned cars. And Dan had told Ron that he had heard that his car had caught fire off of a cigarette. While Ron is smoking a cigarette at the exact time of this conversation, he throws it to the ground, steps on it, and says, "I don't smoke." Obviously, that just doesn't make sense, and that's not true. Dan had then told Ron that he's aware that Ron had been with Wendy the night of the party, and had told Ron that people had been looking for Wendy. Ron's response to Dan saying this, to me, is mind-blowing and disturbing and disgusting. According to Dan, he had said that that bitch probably never made it home, and just kept referring to her, never using her name, but saying that bitch. Dan had then told Ron that he was that bitch's father, and at that point, Ron had some friends in his trailer that came out, and according to Dan, Ron's friends started surrounding him and his friend, and Dan said that if his friend wasn't there, he would have been extremely uncomfortable, but they did get out of that, and both of them just kind of parted ways at that point. So it has been 20 years since Wendy was last seen, since there has been any answers. 20 years and there is no body and there is no answers. Honestly, so heartbreaking how many cases go on for so long and even longer than this without any answer. So the original detective who worked on the case retired with it unsolved. And the new detective who took over, I watched an interview with her, and she said that she strictly goes off of evidence and off of fact. And in her theory and her point of view, Ron and Johnny either know what happened or had something to do with it based off of the evidence that she knows. When this case first opened, Johnny Walker was only considered a witness. He wasn't considered a suspect, a person of interest, none of that. He was just considered a witness. But when the new detective came in to look at this case, a retired FBI agent came in and did a case review. He had found information, raised a lot more suspicion around Johnny Walker. So he moved from a witness to a person of interest. But despite all of that, like I said, there has been no arrest made in this case. During the investigation, Ron did start to take on really absurd and bizarre behavior. He started writing letters on rocks and throwing them into business buildings, and one of the letters actually had to do with Wendy, and it said something along the lines of the fact that Wendy would be home soon. So obviously because of this, the police brought him in and asked him what he meant by this, and he started talking about the fact that he was a disciple of God. God speaks through him, and God told him that Wendy would be coming home soon, which is why he said that. Wendy's sister Charlene believes that his delusions are a result of the guilt that he has buried over the past couple years about what he did to Wendy. So I watched a Crime Watch Daily special about this case, and in the special, the interviewer had gone to Florida and found Johnny Walker and was able to talk to him briefly about the case and his thoughts and all of that. So he was first asked about his relationship with Ron DePeppo, and he said that they weren't really super close friends. They were just kind of acquaintances at the time, and they just kind of briefly knew each other. They didn't keep in touch anymore. And he was also asked if he believed that Ron was capable of doing something like this, and he said that he couldn't really say that he would be capable or if he would not be. He didn't really know him very well, but he did say that he knew Wendy and that Wendy was a really cool girl, and he didn't know why, and he didn't know why someone would do something like this to her. So him saying that he knew Wendy completely contradicts what he told the police back when the case first opened. He told the police that he had never met Wendy and that he did not know her at all. So to go from saying that you've never met her and you don't know her to then going and saying that you do know her doesn't add up. And the interviewer then asked again, she said, so you knew Wendy? She like reiterated it, and he was like, yeah, everyone knew Wendy. She was super popular, she was funny, she was smart, she was a really cool, fun girl. Again, completely going against what he initially told police about never knowing Wendy at all. He had also said that Ron and Wendy had been on several dates and that this was not the first time the two of them had gone out together. He said they were dating heartbreaking for several weeks since first meeting at that bowling alley a month prior to her disappearance, which was also a shock because no one really ever knew that the two of them had been dating, especially her family and people that were close to her in her personal life. No one really knew that the two of them were dating. Him saying that they were dating conflicts with Ron's statement that he told the police, which was that he had never gone out with Wendy before and this was the first time that they had gone out together. The interviewer then decided to go and speak with Ron DePeppo. He still remains a main person of interest in this case. However, like I said, he's not arrested. It's been 20 years and they really have no cold hard evidence that point to him other than the fact that he was the last person to be seen with her. When asked about Wendy, he brought out his Bible, said he always refers to the Bible and that he's not guilty, he is completely innocent. Something odd and interesting and bizarre though is that the interviewer had asked Ron about the car fire and Ron said that that whole thing was a setup. He said the whole car fire was a setup, just like everything was a setup according to him in that interview. And I don't know if he specifically means everything that he said in the case was a setup. I don't know if he means outside of the case it was a setup, something completely different that has nothing to do with Wendy. I don't really know what he meant by that, but that is what he said. The one thing that Johnny and Ron both kind of had similar stories on is the fact that the two of them weren't really close friends. They were more of acquaintances. They didn't really know that much about each other and that was that. Unfortunately, Wendy's mom did pass away, which is even more heartbreaking for the family because they know that the one thing that their mother would have wanted before she had passed was to know what had happened to her daughter. And so to not have those answers and to still not have those answers is extremely, extremely frustrating and heartbreaking. I want to know what you guys think in the comments below, what you guys think happened, if you think it had something to do with Ron DePeppo and Johnny Walker, or if you think it had something to do with something completely different, if you think that the Jeff story is real, if you have your own theory. I would love to hear what you guys think. Let's keep an open discussion. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Alright you guys, that was the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, all of my links are going to be at the end of this video and in the description box below. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name's Savannah. I make videos 3 days a week, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. You should subscribe, join the family. I'll see you guys in a couple days and I love you so much. Bye guys.